All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started today. We are going over the exclusive seller brokerage engagement agreement. You have to be here for the whole class in order to receive CE credit. There's no homework, all that good stuff. All right, you guys ready to dive in? Good. Okay, so let's just start with the very top line. State law prohibits broker from representing the seller as a client without first entering into a written agreement with the seller under OCGA 10-6A-1. So that puts everybody on notice that everything has to be done in writing. Exclusive seller brokerage engagement agreement. For and in consideration of the mutual promises contained herein and other good and valuable consideration, the undersigned seller and the undersigned broker do hereby enter into this exclusive seller brokerage engagement agreement for broker to exclusively represent the seller in listing and selling the property described below for sale on the terms and conditions set herein. The property address, you have your address, city, county, zip, tax ID number. Legal description. Is your contract a valid contract without a legal description?
It's not.
Nope. So you have to check one. You can attach it as an exhibit. You can do the deed book and page, or you can fill out all of the information for number 3. If you do number 3, do not forget to fill in the plat book and page. Or number 4, if it's a condominium. The one thing that I want to make a note of is the little check boxes. Please don't forget to make the check in the check box. If it's not checked, even if it's filled out, it's not part of the contract. So that goes for everything. When you're, I can't tell you how many times I have looked at commission agreements and the boxes are checked. I mean, the boxes aren't checked. It's all filled in 3% or 4% or 8% or whatever it is, and the box isn't checked. That means it's not part of the contract. So please be careful. It's the little tiny details that'll get you into trouble. Another quick note, which took me a while to realize after getting into real estate. But on page 1 where it says A, key terms and conditions 1, 2, 3, when you turn the page, and you on page 3 where it says B1, that is corresponding with it. So that is, if you're looking for something specific, like the list price, then you're going to go to B2, and that's going to describe in more detail the listing, the listing price and period. Does that make sense? So all of the parts that you are filling out corresponds with all the pre-written stuff.
You're saying from the first page?
Yep. So see at the top, the very top where it says A and then 1 exclusive seller brokerage engagement agreement. When you turn to page 3, and it'll say B, this is further explanations corresponding paragraph in section A. So B1 is explaining number 1. And then number 2 is the same thing, like list price and listing period. And then it goes into more detail. So if you have a question or you're like, what does this mean or whatever, they correspond with each other, which it took me a couple of years to realize that after being in real estate. I mean, I would look through the whole contract looking for something and I was like, these correspond with each other. So, okay, A, number 2, list price and listing period. The list at which the property shall be listed for sale is blank. This is the price that your seller wants you to offer it for. If this number changes, if it goes down because they decide to reduce it, you need to do an amendment to brokerage engagement agreement so that you have in writing that they are requesting that you reduce the price that you're offering it for. Commencement date of agreement. This agreement shall commence and be effective upon it being signed by the seller and broker and a signed copy delivered to both parties. So your commencement date is the date that you sign this agreement. That is different, or can be different, than your marketing date. I love that they have separated those. You don't have to wait if you go to a listing appointment and they're like, I want to hire you, but I have 3 weeks of renovations to do. Get your signed agreement then and do the marketing date as a different date. Ending date of the agreement. This shall be the last full date that of the agreement, after which it shall terminate and no longer be in effect unless the parties agree in writing to extend it. We're going to get into some of the extensions that you can do. Make sure that it has an ending date. You cannot have a listing agreement without a start and an end date. Listing period. This term shall be of this agreement shall also be known as the listing period or listing term. Marketing. A selection of multiple listing services. The broker agrees to file the listing with the following multiple listing services. Here is where you're going to list FMLS, Georgia MLS, Central Georgia. Make sure that if you are putting this in your listing agreement, that you are actually going into those MLSs and putting them on there. Just because they syndicate to the same places, if you write that you are putting it into Central Georgia and Georgia and only put it into Georgia, you are breaching the contract. So don't get yourself into trouble there. Delivery of agreement to and listing with MLS. This agreement shall be timely delivered to and listed with the above referenced multiple listing service in accordance with the rules of such multiple listing services, which may limit the availability and time duration of the marketing options below. This obligation and these limitations shall control over any conflicting or inconsistent language contained herein. Marketing commencement date. This shall be the date when the property is first marketed to the public. Seller shall have the right, upon notice to broker, to move this date up or back by more than blank days. So here, if they want 3 weeks, and then you can put in that they have the ability to move it back and forth by 7 days or 2 days or 15 days, whatever. These terms are negotiable between you and the seller. So there is no right or wrong answer. It's just what you and the seller agree to. Coming soon. If offered by the MLS, the seller either directs or does not direct. Again, make sure you are checking the actual box. Do not leave it blank. Does or does not direct the broker to file the property listing in the MLS listed above in coming soon status for blank days prior to the marketing commencement date, during which time the property will be visible to MLS participants as coming soon, but the property may not be shown to the public or purchased during this period. At the end of this period, the property will be changed to active status and marketed to the public as set forth in section A3 above. The maximum coming soon status period is set by the MLS. If the coming soon status period herein exceeds the maximum days permitted by the MLS, then the MLS maximum shall control. Make sure if you use a coming soon, so this is a scenario that happens a lot. You have it coming soon, agent calls you representing a buyer and says, my buyer's up from Florida, they're only here today. I get that we can't purchase the property yet, but can we go see it? Can you show them the property? No. Do not let them see the property. The only way you're going to be able to let them see the property is if you do an amendment to your listing agreement, changing it to reducing the coming soon days so that it can now go active now, go into the MLS and change it to active, and then everybody can see it. But you cannot pick and choose who is allowed to see it well, nobody's allowed to see it. But you can't pick and choose, like say yes to some and no to others. It's either active or coming soon. MLS marketing options. Within 1 business day of the marketing commencement date, the listing must be filed with the MLS listed above. Seller directs the broker to market the property for sale using the multiple listing service option selected below. Select the option which applies. The options not selected shall not become part of this agreement. So you have immediate public marketing option, delayed marketing exempt option, and office exclusive marketing option. So we'll just run through these really quick. The listing will be immediately visible on the MLS to MLS participants and may be electronically distributed through Internet Data Exchange, which is IDX, so that the MLS participants can display it on their websites. The property may also be distributed through syndication to make it available to be viewed on various third-party websites such as Realtor.com, Zillow, or Homes.com. Such listings are considered to be active listings, and the property may be shown to potential buyers. Delayed marketing exempt option. The listing will be immediately visible to MLS participants and may appear on websites of broker or broker's licensees. However, marketing of the property by other brokers through the IDX and syndication to third-party websites will be delayed for a period of blank days. During the delayed marketing exempt period, the listing will not appear on other brokers' websites or on websites like Realtor, Zillow, and Homes.com. Such listings are considered active listings, and the property may be shown to potential buyers. And then you have,
What would be the purpose of doing
good question. I don't know. I don't know why we do this next one either, but some do. Office exclusive marketing option. The property will initially be marketed through an office exclusive period of blank days, during which time the property listing will only be available to licensees affiliated with the broker. During the office exclusive marketing period, the property listing will be submitted to the MLS listed above. However, the listing will neither be marketed publicly nor disseminated through the MLS and will not be visible to other MLS participants. Such listings are considered to be active listings, and the property may be shown to potential buyers. To me, this does a disservice to your clients to only make it viewable to a very small portion of the public. That is not in your client's best interest, and you are hired to represent your clients. And so anyhow,
If you did one of the two of these, is there a certain number of days which would be better than others? Would you shorten that time, or?
That would be a very small amount of time if it were me, but I don't think that I would do either one of them actually, personally, just because there is nothing better for your client than to have it publicly displayed to everybody. That is how they are going to get their best offer. If there's this many buyers and only this many can see it, how are they going to get their highest and best offer? So it's not something I would choose, but I didn't write the contracts. Disclaimer, by signing this agreement, seller understands and acknowledges that if seller is delaying the public marketing of the property by selecting an office exclusive marketing option or the delayed marketing exempt option, the seller may not maximize either the number of offers seller receives or the price offered to the buyer to buy the property. Seller nevertheless knowingly waives the potential benefits of immediate public marketing. So they are making a very clear disclaimer that if you hire a brokerage or an agent from a brokerage who has only, all of their listings go exclusive. They've put a disclaimer on there that you are not going to get as many offers as you would in the open market. Compensation to brokers for professional services, which is compensation. That used to be commission. Everything has changed over to compensation. Compensation to brokers is negotiable and is not set by law. What does that mean? Does that mean that you have to negotiate what you will do your services for? That is not what it means. It means that the public or that the government does not set and mandate what you can charge. You are allowed to set your rate, and you don't have to negotiate on it. You might not get the listing or the buyer, but you are not required, and neither is a broker. Certain brokerages will say they'll have a policy that if you take a listing, it has to be at least this amount. Are they allowed to do that? Yes. A broker is allowed to have a policy, and all of the agents that join that brokerage they're agreeing to follow that policy. So I say this, so when a seller says, and this is a quick scenario of something that I went through with one of my agents, they had negotiated a certain percent to list the property, and it was going to be shared with the other agent. Everything went fine, marketed the property, went under contract, buyer and seller negotiate repairs, and seller says, I'm going to do these repairs, but you, listing agent, have to reduce your compensation. No, that's not how it works. You guys do not have to pay for their repairs. And you do not have to renegotiate the contract because the seller is trying to negotiate. He's not allowed to take money from you to give to the buyer in a negotiation. So that is not what this means at all. This means the government does not tell you what you can and can't list properties for or represent buyers for. So don't let them get it twisted with you.
So, and that's the, I guess, customary, and I basically worked in Atlanta. 6% is not customary.
Correct. There is no customary. You can charge whatever it is that you and or your broker/broker policy sets. That could be 2, that could be 5, that could be 10, that could be 15. If you can get a seller to list their property for 15%, like you are able to do that. If you can show the value in a seller says, yes, it's worth 15%, maybe it's a very small amount of, a small piece of land or something like that. But you are able to negotiate whatever you want. There is no set amount or customary amount.
So I don't know if this is true, but coming here from Atlanta, I was told that it was standard practice here that agents in Middle Georgia tend to not necessarily put it in with their compensation, but they actually have a certain amount that they do so they can buy the buyers gifts. And the gifts are like $300-$400.
What?
No, honestly, and they were saying that it came from Atlanta, that people in Atlanta were buying these extravagant gifts, which is not true.
That's not true here either. No, your compensation is just that. It is exactly what you charge for your services that you provide, and that is how you put food on your table and you keep a roof over your head.
Is it true about getting these extravagant gifts?
No.
No. You haven't heard that either?
You might get a wreath or something like that. Nothing extravagant.
Yeah, but I mean extravagant, like, I think it was that you do like $50 or something like this, supposed to be $25, but they say here they do like a lot more.
They were completely misinformed, whoever told you that.
One person that might have he gave me just put it all out there for anybody that wasn't expecting.
Okay.
No. So yay, lucky for you. Okay, so compensation to the broker is negotiable and is not set by law. Compensation to seller's broker. The seller agrees to pay the seller's broker the following compensation at the closing of any contract to sell, as the term is hereinafter defined, of the property as followed. Again, make sure you check your boxes. You can do a percent. So the first line is going to be the number. If it's the number 9, you're going to write N-I, if I could spell, N-I-N-E, and then you would put 9, the actual number. Whatever it is, you write out the number, and then you do the numerical number as the percent. The second one is a $sign. So that's going to be if you are doing a flat fee. There are agents, and as long as your brokerage allows them, you are not required to work as a percentage. You can say, I charge a flat fee of X amount of dollars. And that's it. It doesn't matter what we sell your house for. This is my fee, and it doesn't change whether the price goes up, down, or the price has nothing to do with your compensation. So that's where that would go. And then other, of course, this is a buyer or a seller and an agent can come up with any terms that both parties agree to. So if it's something other than a percentage or a flat fee, you would put that under other. C, whether compensation is offered to the buyer's broker. Seller hereby approves the following. Select all which are applicable. 1, not initially offering compensation to the buyer's broker, but marketing that seller is open to receiving offers in which the seller pays compensation to buyer's broker. So that is whatever you have in the top one. If you have C1, you are not sharing that compensation. That is just yours. Or 2, compensation being offered to the buyer's broker by either the seller in addition to the compensation being paid to the seller's broker, or, again, make sure you're marking all of the check boxes that need to be checked, seller's broker out of the compensation being paid to the seller's broker. So that's where you're going to share it, or seller and seller's broker as set forth in the other section. So part of it may be shared, and then another part may, that may come directly from the seller. And then again, your boxes are going to be the same. And then the fourth box on here, if seller's offer of compensation to the buyer's broker is conditional, specify the conditions herein. So if there is a reason that that number would change, then this is where it would need to be specified. Does that make sense? Or no compensation being offered or marketed to the buyer's broker. For all purposes herein, the term buyer's broker shall mean the broker, including the broker representing the seller, if they are also working with or representing the buyer as a customer or client. So that's important. Let's read that one more time. Buyer's broker shall mean the broker, including the broker representing the seller. So that would be you. If they are also working with or representing the buyer as a customer or client. So if you have negotiated a specific amount that you are going to either share with the other agent, or you are going to get this amount as the listing agent and the buyer's agent is going to be this amount. If you get both sides, which is dual agency allowed in Georgia?
Yes, it has to be approved.
Correct.
Yes.
It is legal. Most brokerages don't allow it. But if you have a client and a customer, is that dual agency? No. You can have a client as one of them and a customer as the other. So if you have a listing agreement with them, they are your client. if a buyer comes who is unrepresented, wants you to write the offer to the seller for them, you would have to sign a customer agreement, but they can become your customer. If you have negotiated your commission where the buyer's agent would be getting compensation, that means you will be getting the buyer's compensation if you get the other party. Does that make sense?
That has to be approved through your broker as well, doesn't it?
It would be a broker policy if you can have them as a client and a customer. One is a client, one is a customer.
But just to go back, I just want to make sure I understand.
Yep.
Paragraph 4C.
Okay.
So in that, number 2.
Okay.
Compensation being offered to buyer's broker by either seller in addition to the compensation being paid to seller's broker means.
So that means, I'm giving you a blanket statement. Any numbers that I use are simply an example and not telling you what to work for. So let's say in the first one that you have negotiated that you are going to list the property for 2%, let's just say. And then it is selected that now is that 2% going to be shared with the other agent? And if so, how? And what percentages? And if it's not, then you can select that the seller, in addition to yours, the seller is separately going to offer 1% or 3% or whatever it is that they want to offer to the buyer's agent. Does that make sense? So there's lots of different ways to do compensation now. So you can do it as one whole, and you are going to take that one whole and then you are going to offer however much you agree to in your listing agreement.
And that would be under 4A, correct? So if I'm actually checking that, and I'm checking, say, 6%, and then I write the 6 and 6 there. And I'm actually going to divide it however I want.
Yeah.
3 to me, 3 to the buyer's agent.
So if that were the case, then you would be saying compensation is being offered to the buyer's broker. So you would check number 2, right in the little box in front of 2, and then you would check
So you have to check them.
sellers. Yes. So if you're 2, just means you're checking something else in there. Compensation being offered to the buyer's broker by either, and then seller in addition to the compensation, and then I guess it's technically the third box, seller's broker out of the compensation being paid by the seller. So in your scenario, that's the one that you would check. That you would be out of the compensation that the seller is paying you. You are going to pay, and then you would select how much of that. So in your scenario, you said 6, 3, and 3. So you would have 6 at the top, and then the checkbox right in front of number 2 you would check, and then you would check the box right in front of seller's broker out of compensation being paid to the seller's broker. Yeah, that's where you're sharing the compensation. And then if you check that, then you need to check one of the boxes. Are you out of the compensation you are sharing? Is it a flat fee? Is it a percentage? Does the percentage have to be the same in Georgia? No. Are they allowed to pay you 1% and pay a buyer's agent 2%? Yes, they do not have to be the same. But if whatever it is, has to be in writing. Your seller has to know and agree to it.
So if it were 6% and I'm doing 4 to me, 2 to them, I still would need to check C2 and then indicate in the first box 2 and then 2.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
In any event, they don't have to do any.
Say that again.
They don't have to.
No, a seller does not have to offer any compensation at all. They can say, I'm just going to, in your scenario, not telling anybody what to work for. In your scenario, you could check 3 because that's what you're getting paid. And then are they, and let's say they're not offering it initially, they could check number 1, not offering it, but mark it that I'm open to it. It's going to depend on your offer. So the seller may end up, depending on the offer, negotiating anything on there, but they're not tied to a certain dollar amount or percent ahead of time.
And that's when that other party would need to be discussing that miss.
Yeah, so if you do that, an agent's call and they will say, is there compensation being offered to the buyer's agent? You would, in that scenario, say no, because they aren't, but they are open to it, so make it part of your offer. It depends on your offer on if they'll pay it, and if so, how much. So the one thing that I say is think of compensation like closing cost. Closing costs are the buyer's obligation solely, right? A seller doesn't have the lender closing cost. The buyer's agent's compensation belongs solely to the buyer. So when a buyer is asking them to, are you going to offset it? That's exactly what they're asking, just like closing cost. Will you offset my obligation by you paying either a portion of it or all of it? If they pay a portion of it, just like with a lender, if a lender has $10,000 in lender fees and a seller is only willing, or a seller is only willing to contribute $8,000 towards the closing cost, does the lender then have to lower their lender fees to $8,000? No, the buyer comes to the table with the difference. It is the same with your compensation. Whatever you have negotiated initially. So let's pretend, not telling you what to work for, let's pretend you negotiated with a buyer 2%, and a seller is willing to only offset that, so they're willing to contribute 1.5%. That means your buyer pays the other 0.5%. Does that make sense? They need to understand that when they're making their offers. And your seller needs to understand that if they offer a certain amount, we have no idea what their buyer brokerage agreement says. It may say $500. It may say $1,000. It may say 2%. It may say 10%. We have no idea. We're not a party to that. What matters to your seller is this is the offer, and based on this offer, how much are you willing to offset the compensation? This is what they've asked you to do. Are you willing to do it based on the rest of the offer, right? So let me give you an example with closing cost. If an agent calls and says, is your seller willing to pay $10,000 in closing cost? What would be the answer? What if they said $5,000? Will your seller pay $5,000? It depends on your offer, right? Make me an offer. I'll present it to my client, and we'll go from there. It depends. If you're offering me over by $5,000, would I do it then? Probably. And I say I, not me, the seller. But so think of it now as now think of those same terms in compensation. Will you offset the entirety of my buyer's agent's obligation to pay my compensation? Well, it depends on your offer, right?
Could you say something depends on your offer? If you want to offer $10,000 or full list price or however,
well,
you say
well,
like
you don't want to give them numbers. You don't even want to say, if you offer over, what you want to say is present us your best offer and I will present it to my client. Because we can't say yes, right? We can't say under these terms, the seller will accept this. even if we know that there might be something else in there that is a deal breaker for them. But kind of start thinking of your compensation like closing cost. So when I'm listing a house, I explain all of the what buyers are going to ask for in this market right now, which is probably different than 2 years ago, and it'll probably be different again in 2 years from now. But are we in a seller's market or a buyer's market? Well, a lot of that is going to make a difference in what the seller accepts in an offer, right? Kind of depends on the market. Do I have 30 to pick from, or do I have 1 in 3 months? I might have a little more wiggle room with you if I don't have any other offers on the table. But okay, did that answer? I was going to say something else and I forgot, but sorry, it'll come back to me.
I just need to make sure that I indicate, check it, and however it applies.
Yep, and make sure that your seller understands it. So, I mean, this kind of goes into negotiations, and so a little sidetrack here. But I listed a property, and the seller says, should I offer compensation to the other agent? And I said, well, there are a lot of properties that sell where compensation has been paid, but we don't know how much that is. If you were to, let's say, offer 3%, what if their buyer brokerage is only 2%? Now you've just overpaid by 1%, right? So in their best interest, in that scenario, it was better to say the seller is open to offers that include compensation. Make us your offer, and it'll depend on the offer. Does that make sense? So then my seller's not overpaying on compensation because he's offering a higher amount than what was already negotiated.
But the seller wouldn't know what the
Right.
compensation is that was on the buyer's brokerage.
Exactly, which is why in that scenario, he ended up choosing to not offer a compensation initially because it's not a blanket offering. It's just, it depends on their offer. So I'm not offering it initially, but I'm open to offers that are asking for compensation.
Offer as if they wasn't getting paid.
Exactly. Well, no, because then the buyer's agent knows that they are open to it, and they're going to ask for what's on their buyer brokerage agreement.
Okay, so in the listing agreement, if that be the case, and I put 6% here, basically the 6% is going to me.
If you selected that you weren't sharing it.
So if I understand you correctly, if I put on here, and say I put on here the 6%, and this is, I'm saying 3 and 3.
Okay.
But you're saying to your client, who has the buyer brokerage.
Okay, so here's another thing.
But what I'm saying is, if she puts down 2%, her buyer agrees to 2%, but I have 3 and 3.
So you have to give the 3?
So here we're about to get to it.
You see where I'm going?
Yeah. So let me just tell you, if it does have on I think it's on the broker's compensation. It might be in here too, but I'm pretty sure it's on the broker's compensation exhibit. But it says very specifically that if you have negotiated, let's say, not telling you what to work for, but in your example, you have said 6% and you're going to share 3. If there is a difference, it belongs to the listing agent. The difference does, which means if you negotiated 6% and they asked for 2% that you were going to share, you now make 4.
But how would they know?
Well, it doesn't, and that's just it. To a buyer, it doesn't matter
Not to
what.
the buyer, but to the the agent. So if you're giving your buyer to me, but you've negotiated 2%
Mhm.
with your buyer, I don't know what you've negotiated.
Right.
I still have 6% on here.
Right.
And
Well, you could, or you could have just negotiated your 3% and said to the seller, let's wait for the offer, and it'll depend if you accept it or not, depends on the offer.
Right, but the buyer's brokerage agreement doesn't go in with the offer.
No, but they will be asking for compensation. They will put it in as a buyer's.
Oh, it's instructions.
Yeah.
For closing terms.
Well, even in the offer now, there's an exhibit that is the buyer's broker's compensation exhibit, and that's where, or they would put it in as a special stip, but I'm seeing the exhibit more and more. The exhibit comes in with the offer asking the seller to pay for X amount of the buyer's agent's obligation.
So that's where they see it, and that's how they actually get to keep the additional percent.
Yep.
Got it. 'Cause I was
That's where the
confused as
2%
to-
would be, that's where the 2% would be.
Yeah, it would be on the exhibit. That is the buyer asking the seller to pay, in that example, 2%.
So may I ask that, okay, so in the case that a seller agrees to pay 5% to the listing agent, sharing with the buyer's broker, who determines if it would be 2.5% split or if it would be 2 and 3?
Well, you would have decided that in your listing agreement.
Okay.
Because you'll have to put the full amount and then how much is being shared. That can't be empty. That has to. So in that example, you've said, what'd you say, 5.5%? 5%. And then you would have to fill in for C, number 2, it's being shared out of the compensation, and then you have to check by what percent or dollar amount.
And that's the listing agent?
Yes, the listing agent and the seller agree to that up front.
And then I'll see the compensation exhibit when the offer comes over.
Yep.
Tell me exactly
What they want.
agreed to
Exactly.
accept.
Or it'll be as a special stip in the offer, where it'll say that the buyer is asking the seller to pay for this amount.
And
So-
then at that point, it really doesn't matter what it says here. I'm actually going to agree to the 2%, but the closing instructions to the attorney will indicate I'm getting 4.
Yes.
Okay. That is so incredibly different.
It is, but once you start thinking about it in the terms of instead of compensation, when you start thinking about it in terms as pretty equivalent to closing cost, which means it's the buyer's obligation. How much of that will the seller offset? It depends, right? Or they could say, I want to offer a high amount because I want my house sold. I mean, they would be better off not doing that. They would be better off offering that extra amount in closing cost or something that's going to help the buyer, not the agent. But
So, last question. So now what if, and I use you as the buyer's agent. You see my listing, you guys want to make an offer. You called me and you asked me about the compensation. So you asked me.
So it depends. In here, because you put 6 and 3, did you say it's being offered as 3? Then you would say my seller is offering 3.
So do they, at that point, they can change?
Well, so that's a key. So let's say they only had negotiated 2.5%. In order to get the 3, they are going to have to get their buyer to agree to let them get paid that extra 0.5%. They're going to have to do an amendment to brokerage engagement agreement with their buyer that says that they are allowed to receive more than what they had initially put on their buyer brokerage agreement. So what happens as a broker, I'm going to tell you what happens most of the time, is the buyer says, rightfully so, wait a minute, you agreed to work for X. You aren't doing any more work. Why would you get this extra money? Why don't I get that towards my closing costs? So then they're not going to sign an amendment to the brokerage engagement agreement because they just want the seller to put it towards their stuff. Because you've already agreed in your buyer brokerage agreement to work for less than what was being offered.
May I just ask this question? It's a little bit off subject, but still in the same ballpark. So in the case that, say for instance, it's a new construction and they offer bonus incentives, and that's more than your 3%, is that?
If it's not in your buyer brokerage agreement, you can't get it.
Okay.
If there is a new construction, unless you do an amendment and your buyer agrees to it, if a new construction is offering a $5,000 broker bonus and your buyer brokerage agreement doesn't specify that you can get paid a $5,000 broker bonus, you cannot get paid the $5,000 broker bonus. You cannot get paid more than what your buyer brokerage agreement says.
So should you already have that in place?
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're going to be stuck trying to convince a buyer to let you get paid more than what you had already negotiated. And that doesn't usually work out well for the agent.
Or you make it all the way to closing and you wonder why your check isn't what you calculated and
Yep.
you're going off of what you're right. It happens. We were sitting
Yep.
for hours fixing it.
Or for C3, no compensation being offered or marketed. That means when they call and they say, is there anything being offered? The answer would be no. The seller is not offering any compensation whatsoever. We'll get into a little bit more. I do have a negotiation class that we kind of dive a little more deeper into a lot of this stuff. But you would check the box if the seller says, I am absolutely under no circumstances paying for the other agent's compensation. And here we go where I was just talking about. For all purposes herein, the term buyer's broker shall mean the broker, including the broker representing the seller, if they are also working with or representing the buyer as a customer or client. If buyer or buyer's broker does not request or accept the full amount of compensation being offered by the seller's broker, the remainder shall be additional compensation to seller's broker. So you might want to underline that so you don't forget where it's at. Separate compensation on the lease. If seller leases the property or enters into a lease purchase agreement or a lease with an option to purchase agreement, during this agreement, the seller shall also pay broker a separate leasing compensation in the amount of blank dollars and as follows. Notwithstanding any provision of the contrary contained herein, the payment of a leasing compensation, including lease purchase transactions or lease with an option to purchase, shall not relieve the seller from paying the compensation at closing of a contract to sell as provided elsewhere in this agreement. So this becomes additional compensation if they lease the property out, if it's as a lease purchase.
If you check number 3 and say that you're not offering anything, and then they submit an offer asking for compensation, do you have to go back and amend this?
Not if the seller accepts it.
Okay, so they can just accept that. And
They
accept
can. What this would do is, the only reason you would need to amend that is if the seller says, I want you to now market it so that I'm open to it or that I am offering X amount. Then you would amend it. But if they just receive an offer, even though he said he wasn't or she said she wasn't taking, doing it at all, and then they accept it, you don't need to amend this. Good question, though. Protected period. The length of a protected period during the time broker shall be entitled to compensation under certain circumstances. So underline that. We're going to get to that in just a little bit. Under certain circumstances where this agreement has been unilaterally terminated by seller or has expired shall be blank days. What is the right number that goes in there? Whatever you and the seller negotiate. I've seen 90. I've seen lots of things. It is all up to you and the seller. Agency and brokerage. The following types of agency relationship not offered by the broker are. Which ones? This should be your broker policy and what is not allowed. If you are a maximum one agent, dual agency and sub-agency are the two that would be selected here. If broker offers dual agency as one of the agency relationships above, the seller does or does not consent to broker acting in a dual agency capacity, as that agency relationship is explained in section B6B below and in CB, which is Consumer Brochure 01 ABCs of Agency. Seller expressly consents to broker acting in any other agency relationship offered by the broker.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
So now that this actually, the CB01 ABCs of Agency is actually in our listing agreement, should that be one of the brochures that we give to the seller?
It should be, I think. And this is, I say this a lot. I conduct business as if I need to stand and explain myself in front of a judge. So here's the question. Do you have to, at the end of this, when we get to page, whatever it is, 8 maybe? 10. And there are lots of brochures and lots of things that you can check there. Are you required to send them the brochures? No. But if I'm standing in front of a judge and he says, Tracy, you are the professional. You had access to very good information that you just decided not to give to the buyer or the seller. And without that information, they made a decision that cost them a lot of money. So since you had it and you're the professional, why didn't you just give it to them? What would I say? I don't have a defense to that, right? So what would I do? I recommend sending the brochures that are relevant to the transaction. So, lead-based paint disclosure, and we're going to get into this one in more detail in a different class when we go over exhibits. Federal law requires disclosure as lead-based paint in homes, residential properties, or a portion thereof constructed prior to 1978. Select one below. That means you have to select A or B. A dwelling on the property or portion thereof was constructed prior to 1978. The seller agrees to complete and provide broker with a signed lead-based paint disclosure, which is your F316, at the same time as signing this agreement and attached as exhibit blank. That means if this property, you should know when you are going to your listing agreement if it's going to need a lead-based paint, and that should be with your listing agreement. You should be leaving that property with the lead-based paint. Why? We're going to get into this in more detail, but the buyer has to have a signed copy from the seller before they can even make an offer on the property. Not after, before. So if you're signing a listing agreement that needs a lead-based paint, you need to have it with you and you need to leave with it. That would be your best practice. The second thing I advise you to do is add it to your MLS as a document, because all of your buyer agents are going to need it before they write an offer on the property. Their buyer has to have a copy of that lead-based paint disclosure. Or no dwelling on the property or portion thereof was constructed prior to 1978. Let me tell you a very, very quick story. Beach house, very, very old, built back in the 1930s, reconstructed, completely torn down except the fireplace, stood standing, and they built the house around this big, beautiful fireplace. Did everybody that walked in there know that that was from, that the fireplace was should have the lead-based paint disclosure on it? No. And I say that because other people have gone to their grandparents' house who have passed away, and they're like, I grew up, opening Christmas presents around this fireplace, and they take out the whole mantle and they put it in their newly constructed house. So I say all of this to say, I would recommend your lead-based paint go on every one of your properties. Because it is better to disclose that you don't know of any lead-based paint than to not disclose and there be something in there that should have been disclosed. Does that make sense? Seller has the following special circumstances that will require third-party approval before the seller can do the following: list the property for sale, bankruptcy. The seller has filed for bankruptcy protection, and this agreement is made contingent upon the bankruptcy court authorizing the list of the property for sale. 2, divorce. The seller has filed for divorce, and this agreement is made contingent upon the court having jurisdiction over the divorce action authorizing the listing of the property for sale. Or 3, other. So that's just to list the property for sale. And then 8B is contract to sell the property, bankruptcy. The seller has filed for bankruptcy protection. Any purchase and sale agreement for the sale of the property will need to be conditioned upon the approval of the bankruptcy court. Divorce. The seller has filed for divorce. Any purchase and sale agreement for the sale of the property will need to be conditioned upon the approval of the court having jurisdiction over the divorce. 3, a short sale. The sale of the property will not generate sufficient proceeds to pay off the broker's compensation and all mortgages or liens on the property. Therefore, the purchase and sale agreement for the sale of the property will need to be made contingent upon the mortgage lender or lenders and other lien holders agreeing to take less than the face amount of what they are owed. 4, the seller is not on title. The seller does not yet have title to the property, and the purchase of the sale and the purchase and sale agreement for the property will or will not need to be subject to the seller acquiring title to the property. So if you have somebody who has just purchased a property, spent 2 weeks rehabbing it, and they are turning around and relisting it, it's probably not recorded yet. So you need to figure this stuff out. All of these questions need to be questions that you are talking to every single one of your sellers. You need to know, are they going through a divorce? Is there an impending divorce where, they are planning on filing next month? You probably need to know that, right? And it's not to get all in their personal business, it's to protect them. They need to know, Oh, do you have them in there now or you're going over? Perfect, thank you. You guys need to know so that you can protect them from getting into a contract that they now have to sell their house, but they don't have the authority to sell their house for one reason or the other, and then they're going to get into a lot of legal trouble.
This is new.
So is this you can check A and a B, or is it one and the other? So
Well, you could do, there are 2 different things. So in order to list the property for sale, you need the bankruptcy, divorce, or other. So that means this isn't really going to go into effect until I'm not going to list it in the MLSs. It's not going to be posted for sale, listed for sale. And then contract to sell, that means if these are checked, that means any offer that comes in, we are going to need to disclose to the buyer, and it's going to need to be written into the contract that all parties agree that the seller has to have court approval through Houston County, blah, blah, blah.
So they can't happen simultaneously.
They can. Yep. One is for listing the property into the MLS, and the second part, B, is for going under contract. So yes, you could have both if you needed to. Because one, if you were going through, let's say a bankruptcy, they may authorize it, but then it's still going to need to go back with the purchase and sale agreement. Same with the divorce. The divorce may say, yes, you can list it for sale. They may still need to go back and get a separate approval after there's been something, especially, let's say the husband and wife, soon to be ex-husband and wife, don't agree on it. One could say, we're under contract to sell this, and the other one's like, but we should be getting more, and you accepted this less because you're selling it to your brother's cousin's sister. And so we're going back to court. So things like that need to be disclosed, because you can get a seller into a situation where they're legally obligated to sell the property, but they legally can't sell the property. So they're going to get into a hot mess. And the same with a buyer. You don't want a buyer who thinks that they're moving in 30 days to find out that this has to go through Houston County or whatever county it's in, through the court system to even get approval before, we can move on to the second set. So we aren't moving in 30 days. That can be a deal breaker for a buyer who needs their kid to start, on August 1st, right?
So the first one, we are going live, like they are listing it for real in the MLS.
Well, this means the seller has the following special circumstances that require third-party approval before the seller can list the property for sale. Yeah.
And the third-party approval would be the attorney.
Yeah. Well, bankruptcy, divorce, the third-party approval is typically a court. Yeah. Or a bank for if it's a short sale. The bank's going to be the one the bank and any lien holders.
So you wouldn't go live until you got that approval.
Correct. Exactly.
So as the agent, do you send that over to them, or you get that from your seller?
Send whatever to who?
The third party. How do you get that?
It would be up to the seller to go take this to his attorney, who would then file with the courts to go get approval for. You're just going to sign this like, we know that we have to wait to list this. And when you bring me back the approval, then it's going in the MLS. Okay.
So, I know that you said if seller or buyer was to go through bankruptcy, divorce, so forth on, what if they don't disclose that information to you? And you
Well,
just find out.
And that's why it's important to have this discussion while you're working through this. And like, listen, I need to know if you guys have filed for a divorce, if there's an impending divorce, if you know that you owe way less than what, if you know that we're getting ready to list this house for $300,000, but you owe $350,000, you can't sell the house, right? Like, we would have to do a short sale. So those are things that they need to understand, that they need to disclose that to you. Because if they don't, and then it comes up, they're going to be in some legal trouble. And then that's going to be on them for not disclosing it.
And in regards to the title, if it's a husband and wife is not on title, is there, and the wife wants to sell, but the husband.
The only person who can sell is the person on title. Unless they are the legal owner. I have a closing documents on this property that I just bought 2 weeks ago. I've done a bunch of rehab on it. I am still the legal owner. I can still list it, but I'm not on title yet. So we're going to need to make that contingent in any offer that comes in. Does that make sense?
So
Okay.
How does this work with, like previously, you have to set a listing date, but on this, you have to wait for third-party approval.
So what you would probably do is make it a little bit longer. So like, marketing date could be 60 days or 90 days if you know it's going to take approximately 3 months. Or let's say you put 30 days because they're like, yeah, we already have a court date for next Tuesday and whatever, and then it gets postponed. Then you would just amend this, do an amendment to brokerage engagement agreement, amending the marketing date, or, that's what it would be, is the marketing date.
Do the same rules apply if it's probate?
Yeah. Yep. Number 9, this gets missed a lot, which is why I always tell agents get in the habit of marking all of the boxes. Sometimes it'll say if it's not marked, it's, then the answer is 0 or whatever, just mark 0. So that you always get in the habit of filling everything out, because then it's going to be easier to find things that you humanly, you are human and you will make mistakes and you will miss things. Number 9 gets missed all the time. Seller does or does not authorize the broker to assist to the extent requested by the seller in negotiating the terms of and filling out the pre-printed. So 99.9% of the time, the answer is going to be the seller does. That's literally what he's hiring you to do. But we want to make sure that we don't leave that blank. How are we doing on time? All right.
10 after 12.
Huh?
10 after 12.
Yeah. Further explanations. Exclusive seller brokerage engagement agreement. The seller has full authority to enter into this agreement for the listing of seller's property for sale. This agreement may not be amended except by the written agreement of seller and broker. The failure of the parties to adhere strictly to the terms and conditions of this agreement shall not constitute a waiver of the right of the parties later to insist on such strict adherence. Seller is not party to any other exclusive seller brokerage engagement agreement, and all such previous agreements, if any, have expired and not been renewed. The seller acknowledges that the seller may have to pay a previous broker compensation if seller is subject to a current seller brokerage engagement agreement or has unilaterally terminated a previous seller brokerage engagement agreement without the consent of the previous broker. So this is putting them on notice. List price and listing period. Seller agrees to list the property for sale at the list price specified in this agreement. The failure of the property to be shown or sell at the list price may be an indication that the list price for the property is too high. Kind of surprised they put that in there because that's a reality, but initial listing period when property is under contract to sell. If the property is under a contract to sell, as the term is defined below, during the listing period, but the listing period expires prior to the closing, then the listing period shall be automatically extended through the closing of the contract to sell. So what does that mean? You sign this listing agreement for 30 days. January 1st through January 30th. You go under contract on January 25th and it's going to close February 15th. This automatically renews. Your listing automatically renews until it closes, all the way to the closing date, as long as it is under contract while this is active. Does that make sense? Extension. If during the term of this agreement, the seller and a prospective buyer enter into a real property purchase and sale agreement for the property, 2, a contract to exchange property, including the property, 3, an option contract for the sale of the property, or 4, a contract to sell shares or partnership or membership interest in a legal entity constituting the seller, hereinafter collectively referred to in this agreement as a contract to sell, which is not consummated or closed for any reason whatsoever, then the listing period may, please circle that, highlight it, may be extended unilaterally by the broker for the number of days the property was under contract to sell, hereinafter the extension period by the broker, providing written notice of the same to the seller within 5 days of the contract to sell, not being consummated, but in no event later than prior to the expiration of this agreement. If such written notice is not given before the end of the notification period, then the extension period for the transaction shall be deemed to have been waived by the broker. So what does that mean? So we have a listing agreement for January 1st through January 30th. Well, on the 10th, they went under contract and it terminated on the 25th. Well, you have 15 days that you've lost your marketing ability, right? So you can now give them a notice that you are unilaterally, which means only one person, you are just notifying them that you are extending your listing agreement by the same number of days that it was under contract. So if it was under contract for 15 days, you can unilaterally extend your listing agreement for 15 days. But it has to be done in writing, and you only have 5 days to send them that notice. If you wait until the very end, and in that instance, it was they terminated on the 20th, you have until the 25th to unilaterally extend the contract. As long as this isn't expired, this still has to be in play in order for you to extend it. Does that make sense? But if you wait until the 26th, you cannot extend it unilaterally now. You can always extend it with both parties agreeing, but this is a unilateral extension. Marketing. The broker is exclusively authorized to market and advertise the property for sale to the public through any means of broker's choosing. This may include, without limitation, flyers, brochures, videos, yard and window signs, including for sale signs, open houses and mailings. Marketing information about the property may be posted on websites, places, and electronic and print media and multiple listing services, and sent by email, text, and all other means. Seller agrees to not market the property during the term of this agreement. That needs to be something that you mention to your sellers. Do not go out and market your own property.
What if they do that?
Then you need to remind them that this is part of their agreement, that they have hired you to do the marketing. And if there is somebody out there that, or someplace like, hey, I want you to market on this website, then they need to be discussing that with you so that you can do that for them. That's literally what they are hiring you to do.
Sorry, what are the risks of them marketing their own property?
Well, a lot of times they think that if they marketed it to this, somebody comes, I don't have to pay you. And they could be violating in their flyers, in their, advertisement. They don't take classes like you guys do. So they may be violating all kinds of license laws, fair housing laws, without even realizing it. And then it's under your name. No, thank you. Ownership of marketing materials. Any photography and marketing materials paid for or created by the broker shall be the property of the broker. Such materials shall not be used without the prior written permission of broker. Any photography and marketing materials paid for by the seller shall be the property of the seller. So if you hire a photographer to go out there and your seller pays for those pictures belong to the seller. Now let me take just a quick second to remind you, pictures in the MLSs, pictures online do not belong to you. I have seen lawsuits where there is a subdivision, people have been in there for a couple of years, but there's also new construction going on. And there's a big, beautiful entrance. There's a gorgeous pool and, a clubhouse and all of that. And the new construction builder has paid a lot of money to go get drone footages and all kinds of really cool pictures. And they're all online, and you're marketing 123 Main Street over here that has, they've been living there for 2 years. So you go in, you take some pictures of the house, or you hire a photographer to, but you're like, I really like those drone pictures. That's an amazing picture and it'll help sell my house. They don't belong to you. You may not, under any circumstances, go and pull things off of their website, off of their Facebook page. If you did not take the pictures or pay for the pictures from the person who does own them, you may not, use them in your marketing at all. You will get sued. And when they sue you, it is going to be, let's just say it's one picture. You don't pay for one picture. You pay for one picture that has been put on how many websites and how many views did each of the websites get. That would be a very, very, very expensive lesson. Do not use pictures that are not yours.
So in that case, if you get permission from, say, for instance, the previous whomever paid for it, if they say that you can use it with written documentation.
I would be careful, because did that person take the pictures? Here's the thing with photography. If you read the fine print of all of the little contracts that they send you, most of them will say that the pictures remain the property of the photographer, and that you have use to use them only during your listing period, which means you don't get to turn around and let somebody else use them or sell them. Another quick side note. So I had an agent who called me who was furious with one of my type A agents. She's a rock star. She crosses every T and dots every single I. And so I was very surprised when I hear this irate person bring up her name. And he says, I want her to pay for all of the pictures that I paid for because they are on her MLS listing. I paid for them. I paid a lot of money for them. And I'm like, okay, calm down. Let me get to the bottom of this, because you're absolutely right. Like, our agents aren't allowed to use your pictures. And he's like, I've paid for them. He started emailing me while I'm on the phone with him, and he's yelling. He's emailing me receipts and pictures of him and his MLS, and he's like, her pictures are identical. They're my pictures. So I call up my agent, and I'm like, listen, this is what's just transpired. Tell me what's happened. And she's like, oh, well, I just contacted the photographer, and here's my receipt where I paid the photographer for the pictures, because the pictures actually didn't belong to him. They belonged to the photographer based on the contract that they signed. So the photographer turned around and resold them at a less, a discounted rate. But he didn't have to go out and retake pictures. She got pictures and didn't have to wait for a photographer to go out, and didn't have to re-clean, and restage and whatever. And he was pretty irate until he went back and read his own contract that said that the pictures that he paid for were not his pictures. He was just being authorized to use them during his listing period. So.
That's not fair.
Hmm.
Something could have changed, and say it was 6 months, and maybe the community wasn't finished, and he's sending out the same pictures.
Well, and I mean, she could have paid for different pictures, but it was substantially the same.
But
So.
what I'm saying is that if I pay for pictures, you're the photographer, and then she pays for pictures, but something else has happened in the community, they're not going to be the same picture. And if we know how real estate is, no two properties are the same. So why wouldn't you just take,
Well, this was a single resale house. So they were just pictures of the house, the front and the back. They weren't like community pictures. It was just her house. His listing agreement expired. She hired our agent, and our agent called the photographer because the pictures hadn't been taken but like 3 months ago. So, liability for misinformation. The seller warrants that any information the seller provides to the broker, which broker then uses to market and advertise the property, shall be accurate and complete. The seller hereby agrees to indemnify and hold the broker harmless from any and all claims, causes of action, suits, and damages arising out of or resulting from the seller providing misinformation to the broker. One of the things that I'll note here, when buyers are asking questions, when buyers' agents are asking questions, the public is asking questions, and you know the answer, but you know the answer because the seller told you, and your text messages. When I send a text message asking a seller a question and they reply, I will copy and paste it. And then when I reply to the agent, I'll say, per seller, blah, blah, blah. make it very clear that it is not you stating whatever it is, because if it turns out to be, even if they thought that it was correct, if it turns out to be misinformation and buyers make, decisions based on that information, you need to make sure that it is very clear that it is not you giving that information. Keep yourself out of lawsuits. Images. The seller agrees to remove any personal property prior to listing the property of which the seller does not want images to be so captured. Broker shall not be liable to the seller if other brokers or buyers take photographs, videos, or use other technology to capture and manipulate images of the property without permission of the seller and broker. So this needs to be conversations that you have at your listing agreement, that other people are going to be coming into your house. They will sometimes be FaceTiming or taking a video for their mother to view later. So all of their personal pictures, their guns, their jewelry, their medications, all of that stuff needs to be locked away in a safe place and not accessible, because we can say, don't take videos and pictures, but we aren't there, so we can't stop it. So anything that's in the property, if you don't want your ex-husband to know that you're moving, or you don't want them to know where you're located, don't have pictures of your grandchildren if they're, in some sort of legal dispute. Like, just be cautious about what is left out, which should be part of your conversations anyhow. Is take down all of your photos, like pack them away. You're moving, right? You're selling, you're hiring me to sell your house. Get all of your personal property out of there. It should be boxed up in the garage, in a storage unit, whatever, and ready to, it really should look kind of staged. But remove all of that, all of the personal property.
And speaking of, I had a buyer just the other day who asked when we entered the house, and the seller still lives there. He asked me if he could take pictures, and it really truly made me uncomfortable.
Right.
Because I know that the people are living.
It's somebody else's home, yeah.
Right. So, and I thought about it. The pictures are online, and they're online just like how I see the property.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking, if this was my house, but I want a stranger coming in taking pictures.
Right. Well, I have seen some really ugly things on TikTok, and people need to be turned in. They weren't here, but I have seen buyers go into a property with an agent, and they're like, this house is disgusting. Look at these dishes. And then they're posting it all over the internet. Like, what?
Maybe as realtors, we shouldn't allow people to.
Well, but you don't know. You may be in the kitchen and they're just in there videotaping. So sometimes they would ask and you would be like, it's probably best just to use what's already online, because that's been approved by the seller. But I mean, you have no idea. Maybe it may look like they're just on their phone and they're actually scanning around stuff and whatever. So it is. Multiple listing service. Broker agrees to file this agreement with the above referenced multiple listing service within 1 business day of the marketing commencement date, which shall be the date that the property is made available to the public. Seller acknowledges that the MLS is not a party to this agreement and is not responsible for errors or omissions on the part of the seller or broker. Seller agrees to indemnify service or services from and against any and all claims, liabilities, damages, or losses arising out of or related to the listing and sale of the property. The seller acknowledges that by virtue of the list of the property in the MLS, all MLS members and their affiliated licensees will have access to the seller's listing information for the purpose of assisting seller in the sale of the property. Consent of seller to be called. This is your do not call list. If the seller is on a do not call list, the seller expressly consents to broker calling the seller for any purpose related to the sale of the property. This paragraph shall survive the termination of this agreement. Lock boxes. A lockbox may be used in connection with the marketing of property. There have been isolated instances of reported burglaries of homes on which lockboxes have been placed and for which the lockbox has been alleged to have been used to access the home. In order to minimize the risk of misuse of the lockbox, the broker recommends against the use of lockboxes on door handles that can be unscrewed from the outside or on other parts of the home from which the lockbox can be easily removed. Since prospective buyers and others will have access to the property, the seller agrees to either remove all valuables, prescription drugs, and/or keys, or put them in a secure place. All right, so it's 12:30. We're going to go ahead and, can I borrow your pen just to mark this? We're going to take a quick break and then, okay, so we're picking up on page 4. Number 4, compensation of professional services of seller's broker, which is compensation. Obligation to pay compensation to seller's broker. In the event that the seller enters into a contract to sell or lease purchase, or lease with an option to purchase the property or any portion thereof during the term of this agreement with any buyer, the seller agrees to pay the seller's broker's compensation at the closing, regardless of whether the closing is during or after the term of this agreement, and if applicable, the seller's broker's leasing compensation prior to the commencement of the lease purchase, or lease with an option to purchase. Optional compensation of buyer's broker. Seller shall have no obligation to pay the compensation of the buyer's broker. However, some sellers approve such compensation being offered and paid for by either the seller or the seller's broker. If seller has agreed to offer compensation to the buyer's broker on any contract to sell, it shall be paid in full at closing. If seller does not approve offering compensation to the buyer's broker, then the buyer shall be solely responsible for paying the buyer's broker's compensation. So when they are asking about compensation, this is a good place to point them to. They are not obligated to pay it. Does it help them in marketing and getting a buyer to come? Of course, just like offering closing costs does. Offering to pay compensation will help bring buyers. Separate compensation on lease, notwithstanding the above, if the seller leases real property or enters into a lease purchase with an option to purchase contract during this agreement, the seller shall also pay a separate leasing compensation in the amount indicated elsewhere in this agreement. Notwithstanding any provision of the contrary contained herein, the payment of the leasing compensation, including in lease purchase and lease with an option to purchase transactions, shall not relieve the seller from paying the compensation at the closing of the contract to sell as provided elsewhere in this agreement. So that means if they do a lease with an option to purchase, they have to pay the leasing fee plus the closing fee. So plus the compensation that you would have gotten at the closing, they're going to pay that at the closing. They're going to pay the lease fee when it leases, and then they're also going to pay the second fee. Protected period. The protected period shall be the period of time set forth in this agreement commencing upon the expiration or unilateral termination of this agreement by the seller. Notice that says unilateral, not mutual. Unilateral termination of this agreement by the seller, during which broker shall be protected for its compensation or leasing compensation as applicable. If this agreement is unilaterally terminated by seller without the consent of the broker, the protected period shall be the number of days remaining on what would have been the original listing period had it not been terminated, plus the number of days set forth as the protected period in section A.5 of this agreement. There shall be no protected period if broker and seller mutually agree to terminate this agreement. In the event that during the protected period, seller enters into a contract to sell or lease purchase, or lease with an option to purchase, or such buyer has provided information about the property either directly or, wait a minute, did I miss something? Hold on. During the sale of this agreement, was shown to any buyer either in person or virtually. So that was added this year, either in person or virtually, or such buyer was provided information about the property either directly or through a broker working with the buyer. Then the seller shall pay the broker at closing or the commencement of the lease purchase, or lease with an option to purchase as applicable, the compensation or leasing compensation as set forth above. For all purposes herein, showing property to buyers virtually shall include showing the buyers the property by video or sending a video tour to the property, of the property to the buyers. Notwithstanding the above, if this agreement expires and is not unilaterally terminated by the seller, the following exception to the above compensation obligations shall apply. Specifically, and so you guys need to know this, no compensation or leasing compensation as applicable shall be owing to the broker if the seller signs an exclusive seller brokerage engagement agreement with another broker and the property is then sold or leased during the term of the agreement with that broker. That means your protected period is gone. There is no protected period if this expires and they relist it with another brokerage. So your protected period, it's there to protect you from, you have a listing agreement signed with your seller. A buyer comes to the property with their agent, sees the property. They drive by the property later that evening with their, kids because they're excited about this house. They want to kind of just show the kids. And the seller's outside in the yard. And the seller's like, hey, if I terminate my listing agreement, then I won't have to pay them compensation. Then I can get you a better deal and we can get you into this house. That's what your protected period is there for, is to protect them from cutting you out. It is not there to protect you if they're relisting and paying compensation to a different broker. If it expires, does that make sense? Now, let's say it expires and they don't list it. So let's say all of this happened the day before and the next day you're, a buyer comes because of your marketing. You're listing the property, you've marketed it, a buyer comes, and your brokerage or your listing agreement expires the next day, and the third day rolls around, they're not relisting it with another brokerage, and that same buyer comes back and writes an offer. That's what your protected period is for. You are still the one who will and should be writing everything up for them, but you're the one who is owed compensation in that example. Does that make sense? Broker's policy on agent. Unless the broker has indicated elsewhere herein that broker is not offering a specific agency relationship, the types of agency relationships offered by the broker are seller agency, buyer agency, designated, dual, sub, landlord, and tenant agencies. Dual agency disclosure. Does anybody in here do dual agency? We're going to skip it. We're going to go down to we're going to skip B and go to C. Designated agency disclosure. Applicable only if the broker's agency policy is to practice designated agency. Seller does hereby consent to broker acting in a designated agency capacity in the transaction in which the broker is representing the seller and prospective buyer, but where the broker assigns one or more of its affiliated licensees exclusively to represent the seller and one or more of its other affiliated licensees exclusively to represent the prospective buyer. So let me give you an example. We have two maximum one agents. One is the listing agent. Another licensee from maximum one brings the buyer. The broker, who owns the contracts? The broker. So would it be dual agency? Because the broker, even though they're two different agents, so that is what is then going to be a designated agency, where the broker designates one agent to represent the buyer, one agent to represent the seller. That needs to be put on your purchase and sale agreement. If the listing agent, you're the buyer's agent, if the listing agent belongs to your same brokerage, it needs to be put in there. Both of them need to be put as designated agency, and then your names need to go under there that you are the one representing the buyer or the seller, and then the other agent. Does that make sense? So both boxes on the purchase and sale would say designated with your names there.
I have a question. So say for instance, in the case if you switch brokerages and in the middle of a transaction, would you need to amend that?
So if it's already under contract, typically a brokerage signs a broker-to-broker agreement, which says, I'm going to pick up this agent under my firm, the new firm, but this one transaction, 123 Main Street, is going to remain under the old brokerage, and the agent will continue to work it the same way they always have, and the compensation gets paid to that other broker and to that agent, just as it always has under their agreement on whatever splits they are. So it basically stays under the old brokerage while the agent still works it the same way they always have. No other adverse agency relationships. Unless specified herein, the broker has no other known agency relationships with other parties which would conflict with any interest of seller, except that broker may represent other buyers, sellers, landlords, and tenants in buying, selling, or leasing property. Lead-based paint disclosure. As required by federal law, Residential Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act of 1992, if any portion of a residential dwelling was built prior to 1978, the lead-based paint disclosure exhibit F316 is hereby attached as an exhibit to this agreement. The term residential dwelling includes any painted fixture or material used therein that was built or manufactured prior to 1978. Seller understands that the seller must, 1, disclose to the buyer the presence of known lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards. 2, provide the buyer with all available records and reports pertaining to lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards in the residential housing. 3, provide the buyer with a lead-based paint hazard information pamphlet in order to, in a form approved by the Environmental Protection Agency. And 4, permit the buyer to have a 10-day period to conduct a risk assessment or inspection for the presence of lead-based paint hazards. Number 8, special circumstances. The sale of property is contingent upon third parties' approval as indicated above. It shall be the seller's responsibility to seek to fulfill any contingency or condition selected herein, if any, and ensure that the purchase and sale agreement is made subject to any such contingency or condition. B, the broker agrees to keep confidential all information which the seller asks to be kept confidential by express request or instruction, unless the seller permits such disclosure by subsequent word or conduct or such disclosure is required by law. The seller acknowledges, however, that the buyer and the buyer's broker may possibly not treat any offer made by the seller, including its existence terms and conditions, as confidential unless those parties have entered into a confidentiality agreement with the seller. Broker may not knowingly give customers false information. Do not, when somebody, even if they're asking for confidential information, one, don't give it. But what takes precedence over not giving confidential information and being truthful? Being truthful. But what should you be saying? I'm sorry, I can't disclose that to you. But not giving false information always prevails over everything. But that does not mean that you should be giving confidential information just because they ask. Just tell them that you cannot disclose that information. If things escalate, have them call your broker, let them know what's going on, and feel free to have the buyer's agent contact your broker as well. In the event of conflict between broker's duty not to give customers false information and the duty to keep the confidences of the seller, the duty to not give customers false information shall prevail. Under no circumstances should you be giving false information. Just tell them that you cannot disclose that information. Negotiation. While broker may assist seller in negotiating the terms of the contract to sell, if seller has elected to have the broker assist in this role, all decisions regarding price, terms, and other conditions in the contract to sell shall still be made by the seller. Other conditions, the property disclosure statement. Are property disclosures required in Georgia?
They're not required?
Nope. Seller's property disclosures are not required in Georgia. What is required? Latent defects. If the seller knows of a latent defect, he must disclose it. Does the seller, now you know there are different forms of the seller's property disclosure. There is the long form where it asks everything about the house, and then there is a shorter form that says, and this is especially good if they haven't lived in the property, and it basically just says, I don't know of any latent defects, or I do, and this is what they are. What I do like about seller's property disclosures is even if it's just the latent defect that says, I don't know of any latent defects, it also has the whole big long list of everything that stays with the property. So that is great to avoid conflicts at the end of the contract when everybody's arguing over what stays and what goes. Is a seller required to disclose, because you know we have the latent defect disclosure where they can check there are no known latent defects or there are. Is a seller required to say, I don't know of any latent defects? No, they are not required to sign any disclosures unless a latent defect exists. Let me give you an example of a latent defect. So you can give examples to a seller who may not be aware. Let's say that a washer and dryer is upstairs and leaked, and there was, a small puddle on the floor. It was fixed. The ceiling wasn't fixed, or let's say it was all fixed. Is the seller required to disclose that there was a leak? No, because it's fixed. And there is nothing latent. So if it's fixed, it's not a defect. 2, would it be a good idea to disclose it? It would be, and let me give you an instance when it would be a good idea. The upstairs laundry leaks. There was we'll just say a something in the pipe, clogged it up. It spills all over, goes into the downstairs kitchen area or living room area. And there's a lot of water. And they clean up all the water. But what they didn't know was that water had seeped up under the wall, went up the wall, and now when the buyer comes in, you didn't disclose that there was a leak. They go to open up the wall and the whole wall is full of mold. Would the wall of mold be a latent defect? Yes, because it's hidden and a home inspection wouldn't, you wouldn't know about it, right? Let's say the kitchen sink is leaking. Does the seller have to disclose that? Nope, because it can be observed with a home inspection. So if it can be found in a home inspection, it does not need to be, you do not have to disclose it. We recommend that you disclose. Disclosure is better. But if a seller says, am I required to disclose it? No. If there was a leak and there's a big old water stain here, do they have to fill out a seller's property disclosure and disclose that?
No, because you can see it.
You can see it. It does not have to be disclosed.
Does that rule apply to us as agents? As far as not this, so if we knew that the person repaired it and there's possibility of the wall being mold behind it, if we knew that, do we have to disclose it?
Yes, then you need to tell your seller to disclose it. The problem came in where they thought that they had fixed everything, and you don't have to disclose anything that's been fixed. You don't have to disclose anything that is obvious or could be found with a home inspection. And there's a whole list of inspections, and if it can be found in that, you don't have to disclose it. What you are required as a seller to disclose, and yes, if I know of a latent defect, I have to disclose it, is something hidden. So if I know that there are problems with the sewer lines in the yard, that is hidden and you can't see that. So that needs to be disclosed. Inside a wall, that mold, had they have just disclosed it, then they would have been fine, because then the buyer would have been put on notice that, hey, there was a leak here. It was cleaned and corrected. But when you don't disclose it and then something else happens that happens to be a hidden defect, you're looking at a possible lawsuit.
I'm not surprised, because I thought that if there was a defect that was repaired, then it was the seller's obligation to actually provide when and to show receipts.
Nope. Now, if they decide to fill out a seller's property disclosure, which is not required in Georgia, but if they decide to fill one out, they have to fill it out honestly. And there are places on there that are going to say, has the roof ever been repaired? They go through 100 different questions. Those all have to be answered honestly. Has there ever been any leaks? So that's where they would disclose it. But that disclosure is not required in the state of Georgia. See, come to the class.
Well, when you're doing new construction, and that's primarily where my history is, you
Right,
don't have to worry about it.
right.
It's completely different.
Where were we at? Oh, the seller's property disclosure. Georgia law requires that a seller disclose known latent defects in the property which could not be observed by buyer upon a reasonable inspection of the property. This is the case even if the property is sold in as-is condition. Within 3 days of the date of this agreement, the seller agrees to provide the broker with a current, fully executed seller's property disclosure statement, one of those, F301, 304, or 307, or disclosure of latent defects and fixtures checklist. Broker is hereby authorized to distribute the seller's property disclosure statement to buyers interested in the property. The seller agrees to promptly update any of the above referenced disclosures through the closing should any changes occur. The fixtures checklist I love. I have a love-hate relationship for it. I love it, but there are so many agents. And I say agents, are you supposed to be checking the boxes? Never. Your seller needs to be checking those boxes. But as their agent, you need to be going back over them because so let me tell you what, I get all the problems, right? So you have a very loosely filled out checklist. Buyer and seller have been negotiating. They get irritated with one another. Seller feels like buyer is nitpicking everything and wants them to fix everything. And so now they're just angry with the buyers. The buyers feel like the sellers aren't fixing anything. They should be fixing this, this, and this. And so now they're irritated. And this has happened the day before closing. Seller goes through and he says, oh, the light bulbs in here isn't checked. He went and took every one of the light bulbs out. All of the little covers, all completely gone. Screwed off, done, gone. All of the chandeliers, gone. Mirrors, gone, because they were not checked on the box and he could legally take them. So now you have a buyer who's already upset, a seller who's kind of being vindictive, and you're sitting at the closing table. What's the buyer going to say? Because it's their house. They're the ones who's missing the chandelier. The very first thing they're going to do is, they're going to look at their agent. They're going to be like, how did you let this happen? Why didn't you tell me that they would have the ability to take all of this? Guess who's going to be coming out of their commission to make a buyer happy? That's typically what happens, right? So learn it in here instead of at the closing table. Go through them one by one. Do you know the mailbox is on there? And if it's not checked, the mailbox can be taken with the seller. Hazardous conditions on property were on page 6. Seller acknowledges that broker has no duty to inspect the property for defects, hazardous conditions, repairs, or any other matter. Seller owes a duty of reasonable care to keep the property safe for prospective buyers and their agents, invitees, and contractors who view and or inspect the property. This duty includes a duty to warn all such persons of dangerous conditions that would not be obvious to such persons. To minimize the seller's potential liability, seller is encouraged to correct all hazardous conditions on the property. Seller agrees to indemnify and hold broker harmless from and against any and all claims, causes of action, suits, and damages arising out of or relating to a person or persons being injured or harmed while on the property. That's where their GAR is protecting you. Limits on broker's authority and responsibility. The seller acknowledges and agrees that broker may show other properties to prospective buyers who are interested in the property, shall have no duty to inspect the property or advise buyer or seller of any matter relating to the property which could have been revealed through a survey, appraisal, title search, official Georgia wood infestation report, utility bill review, septic system inspection, well water test for radon, asbestos, mold, and lead-based paint, inspection of the property by a licensed home inspector, construction expert, structural engineer, or environmental engineer, review of this agreement, and any transaction by an attorney, financial planner, mortgage consultant, or tax consultant, or consulting appropriate governmental officials to determine, among other things, and without limitation, the zoning of the property, the propensity of the property to flood zone certifications, whether a condemnation action is pending or has been filed, or other nearby governmental improvements are planned. Seller acknowledges that the broker does not perform or have expertise in any of the above test inspections and reviews or in any of the matters handled by professionals referenced above. Please, please, please stay in your lane. When you step outside of your real estate lane and into inspector lane, That's where your liability is going to start coming in. Yes, ma'am.
Is it that the seller is to provide a termite letter?
No, it's negotiable.
Even for VA?
Well, it is. And now your VA contingency has a check mark for does the buyer pay for it or does the seller pay for it? So it's a lender requirement on like a VA, but even who pays for that certification is up for negotiation now. It used to be that the seller always had to pay it, and they agreed to that in the VA contingency, but now it's up for negotiation on who pays it.
But they can't close without it. The buyer cannot close.
The buyer can't close, but if the buyer is supposed to pay for it and doesn't get it, the buyer's the one in the breach of contract.
So different.
Well, never mind. When it comes to the appraisal, in that case, never mind, I lost my question.
Okay. Seller acknowledges that the broker does not perform or have any expertise in any of the above test inspections and reviews or in any matters handled by the professionals referenced above. Seller should seek independent expert advice regarding any matter of concern to the seller relative to the property of this agreement. Seller acknowledges that the broker shall not be responsible to monitor or supervise or inspect any portion of any construction or repairs to the property, and that such tasks fall outside the scope of real estate brokerage services. Do not put yourself into positions where you need to become an expert where you are not an expert. If they are having renovations done, the seller needs to be the one who is inspecting the final whatever, and making sure that it's to their liking, not you. When you overstep your boundaries and you step into other roles, that's when you end up taking on liability because you're doing tasks as if you were. And that's where a judge is going to find you more in this than you want to be. C, shall owe no duties to the seller nor have any authority on behalf of the seller other than what is set forth in this agreement, shall make all disclosures required by law, shall not be responsible for ensuring that seller complies with the duties and deadlines contained in any contract to sell entered into by the seller, and that the seller shall be solely responsible for the same, and F, shall be indemnified and held harmless by the seller during and after the termination of this agreement for any and all claims, causes of actions, or damages arising out of or relating to inaccurate and or incomplete information provided by the seller to the broker, earnest money handled by anyone other than broker, seller's negligence or intentional wrongdoing, any loss or theft of valuables, prescription drugs, keys, or other personal property relating to the use of a lockbox or an open house resulting from the seller's failure to remove or secure the same. Remind them that they are responsible for removing their valuables. The existence of undisclosed material facts about the property or the transaction, and any damages or injuries occurring on the property as a result of dangerous or defective conditions on the property, or the failure to secure or restrain pets. G, shall have no authority to bind the seller to any contract to sell or give notices on behalf of the seller other than to forward, if requested by the seller, a notice signed by seller pertaining to a real estate transaction. Under the standard GAR purchase and sale agreement forms, notice received by the broker is deemed to be notice received by the seller. That is the magical key words that allows the termination of whatever or certain notices to be sent to the agent and then the agent will then send it. But when it's received by the agent, it is received.
So, in regards to lockboxes, is it required, or I know you wouldn't say required, but using Supra or using a contractor's lockbox?
I would recommend a Supra, and I would sell a seller on that fact. They are way more secure. You have to be licensed in order to get into them. A code, I can sit there and you have no idea because you're the listing agent, right? You put it on there. Your code is 1234. You give it to the other agent. The agent is sitting at the door, 1234, opens it, has no idea that they're standing right behind you, watching you put it in. Now they have the code. Now they call up their friend from wherever who's now going to call his friend who's going to come in the middle of the night and take all of the appliances. Like you have no idea once that code is out, like it's out. In a lockbox, you have to be licensed in order to open. So. Limits on brokers' liability. The seller acknowledges that broker shall under no circumstances have any liability greater than the amount of compensation paid hereunder to the broker, excluding any compensation amount paid to a cooperating real estate broker, if any, or if no compensation is paid to the broker, then a sum of $100. This is GAR trying to limit the liability to, if somebody sues you, you're limited to the amount of compensation that you receive. Can a judge strike through that? So don't forget that. Broker shall have no liability for providing information that later turns out to be incorrect or false, provided that the broker did not have actual knowledge that the information was false and discloses to the seller the source of the information. So that's where it's important to give the source of whoever is telling you the information. If you're passing it along, always include where you got that information from. Notwithstanding the above, shall have no liability in excess of $100 for any loss of funds as the result of wire or cyber fraud. This limitation of liability shall survive the termination of this agreement. Keywords. Disclosure of potentially fraudulent activities as required by the Georgia Residential Mortgage Fraud Act. To help prevent fraud in real estate transactions, the seller does hereby give broker permission to report any suspicious, unusual, and/or potentially illegal or fraudulent activity, including but not limited to mortgage fraud, to governmental officials, agencies, and/or authorities, and/or any mortgage lender, mortgage insurer, mortgage investor, and/or title insurance company, which could potentially be harmed if the activity was in fact fraudulent or illegal. The seller acknowledges that the broker does not have special expertise with respect to detecting fraud in real estate transactions. Therefore, the seller acknowledges that activities that are fraudulent or illegal may be undetected by the broker, and activities which are lawful or routine may be reported by the broker as being suspicious, unusual, or potentially illegal or fraudulent. Arbitration. All claims arising out of or relating to this agreement and the alleged acts or omissions of any of the parties hereunder shall be resolved by arbitration in accordance with the Federal Arbitration Act and the rules and procedures of the arbitration company selected to administer the arbitration. Upon making or receiving a demand for arbitration, the parties shall work together in good faith to select a mutually acceptable arbitration company with offices in Georgia to administer and conduct the arbitration. If the parties cannot mutually agree on an arbitration company, the company shall be selected as follows. So just remember, this is if you're going to arbitration and the parties can't agree, this is the sequence of events that will happen in order to get an arbitration company. Each party shall simultaneously exchange with the other party a list of 3 arbitration companies with offices in Georgia acceptable to that party to administer and conduct the arbitration. If there is only one arbitration that is common to both lists, the company shall administer and conduct the arbitration. If there is more than one arbitration company that is common to both lists, the party shall either mutually agree on the arbitration company, on which arbitration company shall be selected, or flip a coin to select the arbitration company. If there is not initially a common arbitration company on the list, the parties shall repeat the process by expanding their list by 2 each time until there is a common name on the list selected by the parties. The decision of the arbitrator shall be final, and the arbitrator shall have the authority to award attorney's fees and allocate the cost of arbitration as part of any final award. All claims shall be brought by the party in his or her individual capacity and not as a plaintiff or class of action or class member in any purported class or representative proceeding. The arbitrator may not consolidate more than one person's claims and may not otherwise preside over any form of representative or arbitrator. Wait a minute. I need my reading glasses. I'm getting too old. Any form of the representative or class proceeding. Notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained herein, this agreement to arbitrate shall not apply to 1, any claim regarding the handling and disbursement of earnest money, and 2, any claim of broker regarding the entitlement to or the non-payment of compensation hereunder. So those are the 2 reasons why it would go to court and not arbitration. Assignability. As part of a sale of all or substantially all of the assets of the broker to another brokerage firm, seller consents to this agreement being assigned by the broker to the other brokerage firm. In such event, the assignee, upon consenting to the assignment, shall thereafter be responsible for performing all duties and responsibilities of the assignor under this agreement, and 2, shall have all the rights of the assigner, including the right to receive the compensation referenced in the agreement. So that if somebody buys out your brokerage company, all of the contracts that belong to the previous broker are assigned to the new broker that is taking over, and the seller is agreeing to that in their listing agreement. Attorney's fees. In the event this agreement or any provision therein is enforced through or is the subject of a dispute resulting in litigation or arbitration, the prevailing party shall be entitled to recover the actual attorney's fees reasonably incurred. Broker. In this agreement, the term broker shall mean the licensed Georgia real estate broker or brokers or brokerage firm or firms and their affiliated licensees in this transaction, except as may be specifically provided otherwise herein. Definition of seller and buyer. This is kind of important. You wouldn't think that it is, but it is. For the purpose of this section, the term seller shall include seller, all members of the seller's immediate family, any legal entity in which the seller or any member of the seller's immediate family owns or controls, directly or indirectly, more than 10% of the shares or interest therein, and any third party who is acting under the direction or control of any of the above parties. For the purposes of this agreement, the term buyer shall include buyer, all members of the buyer's immediate family, any legal entity in which the buyer or any member of the buyer's immediate family owns or controls directly or indirectly more than 10% of the shares or interest therein, and any third party who is acting under the direction or control. So what does this mean? This means when your seller signs a listing agreement, their family members are bound to it just like they are, which means, let's say they mutually terminate. Usually this works, actually, this example with a buyer. If a buyer signs a buyer brokerage agreement, that same verbiage is in there. And then you go and take and show them 30 houses. And then the husband signs a different buyer brokerage agreement with somebody else to have them write the offer for you, because you don't have a buyer brokerage agreement with the husband, who is actually the one who is purchasing the house. So this means the seller and all of the seller's immediate family members, so their spouses, their children, whatever, so that there isn't this cat and mouse game of who's actually listed on here and ways to get out of it. Does that make sense?
When they say the legal entity, that would be like if
Trust.
Well, and that means if the seller signs this, and then the property is actually in a business name, they can't then go write another exclusive agreement under the business name with another brokerage. Does that make sense?
they got people that own it more than 10% with them.
Yep.
They're on it too.
Yep. So again, this is GAR protecting you guys. Are you cold? I'm like, it's 73 in here. Is anybody else cold? It's 74. I'm like, y'all may be getting sick.
No, we trying to keep from getting
Okay. Disclaimer regarding the sale of certain property. Seller acknowledges that OCGA 2-1-7 prohibits certain non-resident aliens, foreign persons, foreign companies, and U.S. companies owned by any of the above from buying or possessing agricultural land and certain land within a 10-mile radius of any military base, installation, or military airport. So is this important to us? Yup. Seller agrees to carefully read the entirety of the above referenced code section before contracting to sell such land. Seller should consult with legal counsel to fully understand the law. If seller has not submitted written questions to the broker regarding the law, to broker, says it over, prior to contracting to sell the prohibited property, seller acknowledges that seller fully understands the limitations and requirements of the law, and broker shall have no responsibility for further doing the same. In such event, seller shall indemnify and hold broker harmless of any and all claims, causes of action, suits, and damages arising out of or relating to the seller's failure to comply with the law. Violating the law can subject seller to civil and criminal penalties. The law also requires certain sellers and others to divest themselves of such property within certain time periods if they are now no longer legally able to purchase such property. So if that becomes an issue, if it is somebody that is foreign and they are purchasing agricultural land near the base, you need to refer them to an attorney.
Is that common?
Yeah.
Is it common, or is that like hardly happens?
I mean, it could happen. It really just depends on, if they're a U.S. citizen, then they're fine. But if they're foreign, you need to be careful where they're purchasing and what they're purchasing. Did you have a question?
So that,
Entire agreement. This agreement represents the entire agreement of the parties with respect to the listing of the property for sale and its intent and is intended to supersede all prior written and verbal agreements of the parties hereto. No representation, statement, promise, or inducement not contained herein shall be binding to either party hereto. This agreement shall be binding on the heirs of the seller. Fair housing disclosure. Seller acknowledges that broker is committed to providing equal housing opportunities to all persons and that seller and broker are obligated to comply with state and federal fair housing laws in selling the property. Seller and broker agree not to discriminate in the sale of the property on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity. The FERPTA affidavit, unless seller is a foreign person, as the term is defined in section 1445F3 of the IRS Code, seller shall deliver to the closing attorney at closing a FERPTA, which is a Foreign Investment in Real Estate Property Tax Act, affidavit including or indicating that seller is not a foreign person. If seller is a foreign person, additional taxes may need to be withheld at closing. GAR forms. The Georgia Association of Realtors issues certain standard real estate forms. These GAR forms are frequently provided to the parties in real estate transactions. No party is required to use any GAR form. These forms are generic and written with the interest of multiple parties in mind. The parties agree to carefully review the GAR form to be used in this transaction and modify the same to meet their specific needs. If any party has any questions about their rights or obligations under any GAR form, they should consult an attorney. Provisions in the GAR form may be subject to differing interpretations by the courts other than what the parties may have intended. Our courts may at times strike down or not enforce provisions in our GAR forms as written. No representation is made that the GAR forms will protect the interest of any particular party or will be fit for any specific purpose. The parties hereto agree that the GAR forms may only be used in accordance with the licensing agreement of GAR. While GAR forms may be modified by the parties, no GAR forms may be reproduced with the sections removed, altered, or modified unless the changes are visible on the form itself or in a stipulation, addendum, exhibit, or amendment hereto. I'm just going to say a side note, be careful. Parties can agree to strike out pieces of the GAR form as long as both parties agree to it. But you need to run it by your broker and probably an attorney as well, because there is specific language in here that if it's not in here, you're going to end up being in trouble with making sure that it's legally binding on all parties.
Going back to the affidavit.
Oh, God,
What does that mean?
Huh?
What does the affidavit mean? So like if the person is a U.S. citizen, they have to have that.
Yes, so there is a FERPTA that you sign at closing that says you're not a foreign person, and if you are a foreign person, there are additional taxes that are paid. It's always been part of closings. Now it's just part of the GAR form that says at closing you're going to sign this.
And who provides that form?
The attorney.
The attorney?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's for the buyer.
Yes.
And so do we have to even?
The seller may have to sign one too, actually.
So are we supposed to be asking buyers, are they citizens at home? Or we?
If they are purchasing or selling land that is within 10 miles of the base, that is agricultural land, then yeah.
Something that I see, so in regards to the fair housing disclosure,
Mm-hmm.
when you go back to, in the listing, check marks, where it actually says, remember I was asking you about that, that seems like it can actually be taken as, I don't know if I want to say discrimination, but if you're just actually notifying people in your office and not giving to the public, that to me doesn't seem like that's fair housing. So is that a contradiction?
It is, because it's not discriminating against any of those. We'll go back to it. It doesn't discriminate against religion, race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity. So it has nothing to do with any of those protected classes. It is only going to a certain brokerage, no matter who's in that brokerage, and they're the only people who could see it. So it's not actually discrimination or a fair housing issue. Mm-mm. Because all of those people in that office.
What if it's actually a community, like in Atlanta, Buckhead, and it's not going to people who live outside of Buckhead?
Well,
You know what I mean?
so that's not what this does. This would go to just your brokerage. So only the people within the brokerage would be able to see it.
Which means they can still sell to those people.
Yes.
But
Which means if a buyer wants to buy it, they're going to have to go through that brokerage. They're not even going to see it without going through that brokerage.
that's a problem I'm having if they don't see it, because if it's
Right,
based
which is
on-
why it limits their ability. I don't like it, but
No.
they're allowed to do it. That's for sure. So,
You wouldn't know it. And if I had a house that was, say it was actually just going to investors, you know, I may have a buyer who can only afford the house of an investor, but it's just going to a particular group of agents that only deal with investors. Does that make sense? Am I
Yeah.
making much of it?
I
Do
know,
you know what I mean?
I do, but I mean,
So maybe
the
that's
seller
something we
is,
can actually write to Wiseman and say, why is that in there?
yeah.
This is kinda-
I mean, right now they're allowing it. I don't like it, but there's some brokerages that are set up that way. All right, so we've got 18 minutes and we've got two pages to get through. Governing law and interpretation, this agreement may be signed in multiple counterparts, each of which shall be deemed to be an original and shall be interpreted in accordance with the laws of Georgia. No provision herein by virtue of the party who defaulted shall be interpreted less favorably against one party than another. All references to time shall mean the time in Georgia. You guys need to make sure your California buyers know that. If any provision herein is held to be unenforceable, it shall be severed from this agreement, while the remainder of the agreement shall, to the fullest extent permitted by law, continue to have full force and effect as a binding contract. That's what allows a judge to strike out one piece and the rest is still enforceable. Independent contractor relationship. This agreement shall create an independent contractor relationship between broker and seller. Broker shall at no time be considered an employee of the seller. Unless otherwise stipulated, all affiliated licensees of brokers are independent contractors of broker. No imputed knowledge. The seller acknowledges and agrees that with regard to any property which seller intends to sell, there shall be no knowledge imputed between broker and broker's licensees or between the different licensees of broker. Broker and each of the broker's licensees shall be deemed to have only actual knowledge of such properties. Notices between the seller and broker. Communications regarding real estate transactions. Seller acknowledges that many communications and notices in real estate transactions are of a time-sensitive nature, and that failure to be available to receive such notices and communications can have adverse legal, business, and financial consequences. During the term of this agreement, the seller agrees to remain reasonably available to receive communications from the broker. Does your seller need to know that that's in here? Yeah, they need to know that they are expected to be reasonably available. Notices between the broker and seller regarding this agreement. The seller and broker agree that communications and notices between them regarding the terms of the agreement shall be in writing, signed by the party given the notice, and may be delivered to the person, may be delivered in person or to any address, email address, or facsimile number to the person to whom the communication or notice is given, specifically set forth in this agreement. It is the intent of the parties that those means of transmitting notices for which the party has not provided an address or number shall not be used. You need to highlight this. Shall not be used for receiving notices or communications. For example, if a party has not provided an email address in this agreement, it shall mean that the party is not accepting notices or communications sent by this means. That means if you have a seller brokerage engagement agreement, your seller signed it and there's no email address on there, you cannot send notices to them by email. This is also true when on your purchase and sale agreement, where both parties, the buyer and seller, are represented by an agent. The agent's email that is on this contract is the only one that you can send notices to. So let me tell you what's happened there. Agent has such and such, it wasn't our agent, but such and such at maximumplatinum.com is on their contract. The buyer's agent had a different Gmail address that they've always communicated back and forth to. Buyer sends termination in the due diligence period to the Gmail account. Did they send notice? No. Now their buyer lost their earnest money and it went to the seller because the buyer's agent sent it to the agent's email address that was not on the contract. So you guys be very careful because buyer's going to be like, do you think the buyer's just going to walk away from their earnest money? No, they're going to be suing you. That's what's going to happen. Are we on referrals? Seller hereby authorizes broker to refer seller to another real estate licensee or broker for brokerage or relocation services, or to a builder for services not related to the sale of the property. Seller acknowledges and agrees that broker may receive a valuable consideration for the referral. So this is in your buyer brokerage agreement and your listing agreement. When you are receiving referral compensation because you are referring them to another agent, you cannot do it without the written authorization of the buyer or the seller, whoever it is. Your client has to give written authorization. If you have a listing agreement, this is your written authorization. If it's somebody who's just called you and you're like, hey, I'm going to connect you with this agent, you can't receive compensation unless that person agrees in writing to do it. So, but if you have one of these, you're covered. Statute of limitations, all claims of any nature whatsoever against the broker and or their affiliated licensees, whether asserted in litigation or arbitration, and sounding and breach of contract and or tort, must be brought within, look at that, changed again, 1 year from the date of any claim or cause of action arises. Such actions thereafter shall be time barred. That means they cannot wait like they used to. It was 3 years, then they moved it to 2 years. Now they only have 1 year to file a claim against you. Survival, the rights and obligations of broker to compensation subsequent to the termination or expiration of this agreement as set forth herein, the limitation of liability, the obligation to arbitrate and indemnify broker, and other similar provisions that by their terms are meant to protect the broker shall survive the termination of this agreement. That verbiage is vitally important to be in there because once you have a closing, and it's the same with amendments. Let me tell you another quick story off the subject of this, but you go to closing, seller hasn't had something fixed, you guys write an amendment that the seller will fix it, next Tuesday or whatever. You close on the property. What happens to all amendments? What happens to everything? It all dies. It all goes away. Nothing survives closing unless it specifically says that it survives closing. So if you're writing amendments that are going to affect after closing, it has to have that verbiage. Do you think that sellers have figured that out and not fix something after closing because they're like, didn't have that verbiage in it? Sure did. So make sure that you put that verbiage in there and talk to your closing attorney to make sure that everything that you want in there is covered the way that it should be. Third-party vendors. Broker may provide the seller with the names of vendors to perform services on behalf of the seller relative to real estate transactions involving seller. Broker does not warrant or endorse the performance of any such vendor, and the names of the vendors are provided solely as a courtesy and starting point for the seller to identify possible vendors to perform services on behalf of the seller. Seller agrees to do his or her own due diligence regarding the skills, expertise and reputation of all vendors performing services for the seller and the terms of all contracts with vendors, including whether there is a limitation of liability in such contracts. All decisions regarding which vendor to hire shall be solely that of the seller. Time is of the essence. Use of NA shall mean not applicable. Broker's duties to the seller. Broker shall promote the interest of the seller by 1. Seeking a sale price at the price and terms stated in this agreement or at the price and terms acceptable to seller, provided, however, broker shall not be obligated to seek additional offers to purchase the property while the property is subject to a contract to sell unless brokerage engagement so provides. That means once you go under contract, you are not obligated to keep trying to get more offers unless your contract provides for it. 2, timely presenting all offers to and from the seller, even when the property is subject to a contract to sell. 3, disclosing to the seller material facts which the broker has actual knowledge concerning the transaction. 4, advising seller to obtain expert advice as to material matters which are beyond the expertise of the broker. And 5, timely accounting for all money and property received in which the seller has or may have an interest. B, the broker shall keep confidential all information received by the broker during the course of the engagement, which is made confidential by an express request or instruction from the seller, unless the seller permits such disclosure by subsequent word or conduct, or such disclosure is required by law, provided, however, that disclosures between broker and any of the broker's affiliated licensees assisting broker and representing the seller shall not be deemed a breach of the duty of confidentiality described above. The seller's duty, seller will do the following: cooperate with the broker to sell the property to prospective buyers and will refer all inquiries concerning the sale of the property to the broker during the term of this agreement. Your sellers need to know what they are obligated to be doing. 2, make the property available for showing at reasonable times as requested by broker. 3, provide the broker with accurate information regarding the property, including information concerning all adverse material facts pertaining to the physical condition of the property. 4, comply with all local, state, and federal laws applicable to the sale of the property. And 5, carefully read all contracts to sell before signing them and complying with all duties and all timelines contained therein. Now we're getting into default, which is super important to understand And your sellers should know when they sign this what happens if they default or if a buyer defaults. Events constituting a seller default. Seller shall be in breach of this agreement if the seller, 1, terminates this agreement prior to the end of the agreement without the prior written agreement of broker. Broker removing the listing from multiple listing services, taking down the broker sign, ceasing to market the property after this agreement is unilaterally terminated by the seller, and other similar activities shall not be evidence of the broker's agreement to mutually terminate this agreement, but shall instead merely be an acquisition, I can't even say that word, by the broker of the unilateral termination by the seller. 2, defaults under any contracts to sell the property resulting in such contract not closing. 3, agrees with the buyer of the property to terminate a contract to sell without consent of broker. Or 4, refuses to accept a lawful bona fide written offer to purchase the property meeting the following terms and conditions at a time when the property was not otherwise under contract. 1, the purchase price in the offer after deducting all fees, costs, and contributions to be paid by the seller, other than real estate brokerage compensation to be paid by the seller and the seller's payment of ad valorem real property taxes through the date of closing, is for at least the full listing price set forth herein and is to be paid in cash or cash equivalent at closing. So these are the reasons that a seller has to, they have to accept the terms that they've offered the property for sale as long as they meet these criteria. The offer is not subject to contingencies, conditions, due diligence periods, or required terms. So if there is any sort of contingency in there, a financing contingency, a due diligence period, they are not required to accept the contract. The offer is not subject to seller warranties or representations other than warranties. Those warranties the seller agrees to provide in the seller's property disclosure statement the seller has filled out and made available to prospective buyers. 2, the seller warranting to convey good and marketable title, for which purposes herein shall have the same meaning set forth in the GAR purchase and sale agreements to the property at closing by limited warranty deed, and the date of closing in the offer is not less than 30 days and not more than 45. So if an offer comes in with no contingencies, all cash, they're not asking for closing costs, they're not asking for compensation of the buyer's agent, and the closing has to be between 30 and 45 days.
Can the seller just change their mind and wouldn't sell the property?
While they're under contract?
Or if it's actually listed? If it's listed,
Well,
then
if they do, then you would have to decide. I mean, we can't make anybody sign, anything. One, depending on your contract with them, do you have special steps that they're going to have to pay for marketing, all the money that you've put into it? Are you going to do a mutual termination or a unilateral termination? So there's things to consider.
Is that like within a special stipulation to add that? Okay.
Yeah. And here's part of it too. The broker remedies of seller default. Seller shall immediately pay the broker the compensation referenced herein for any of the seller defaults above, except for seller unilaterally terminating this agreement prior to the end of the listing period, as the same may have been extended as provided herein. With respect to this event of default, the seller's obligation to pay broker its compensation shall be controlled by the protected period sections. So that means if they unilaterally terminate, that means the seller is giving you notice that they are terminating their engagement agreement with you. Your protection period is what will allow you to get paid a compensation if it closes with somebody that you brought. Does that make sense? Seller default. In the event that the seller defaults under this agreement, seller shall, in addition to its other obligations set forth elsewhere herein, immediately reimburse the broker for the out-of-pocket cost and expenses incurred by the broker or broker's affiliated licensees in seeking to market and sell the property. Such costs and expenses shall include, without limitation, printing and copying charges, mileage at the highest rate allowed by the IRS as a business deduction, and expenses to advertise the property in various media. Seller shall also pay all costs, fees, and charges for removing the listing from any multiple listing service. The payment of these fees, charges, and expenses by seller shall not waive or limit the broker's right to assert any other claim, cause of action, or suit hereinafter collectively claims against the seller for broker's compensation and or other damages, and shall not release the seller from such claims. Notwithstanding the above, the amount of such fees, charges, costs, and expenses paid by the seller to the broker hereunder shall be an offset against any claim of broker for compensation. So what that means is, if the seller unilaterally terminates your listing agreement, they are required to reimburse you for everything that you have receipts for, plus mileage, plus MLS, like it's going to cost you $25 to withdraw it out of Georgia MLS. So the seller is required per your contract to pay those fees. Now, just because they pay those fees does not release them from the compensation. So now let's say you have a protected period, they don't relist it, one of your buyers ends up buying the house. They still owe the compensation. But if they paid you $1,000 to reimburse you for everything, that $1,000 is going to be deducted out of the compensation when you get paid that later on if it closes. Does that make sense? So it offsets it.
But in regards to if they were to unilaterally cancel the contract and you have these special steps, do you put a certain amount of what your marketing cost, or are you just going to?
You can, or you're going to be required to like show receipts, show mileage, show
So just
like then
leave
it's
it like it is, and
you can leave it like this, and then if they want to terminate, you can say, look, remember under your default when you want to withdraw this early, these are the things, and this is my cost of withdrawing this early. And then sometimes they'll be like, well, let's just wait until it expires then.
So would that be the same thing as a retainer fee? Or no?
No, because they're releasing you. That's them terminating the contract, and now they are going to reimburse you because you've paid for photography. You're going to have to pay to withdraw it from the MLS. You've driven 50 miles to their property back and forth 15 times. Then you're going to times that by the IRS mileage that you're allowed, and you're going to charge that to them. Now you may or may not. They may say, listen, I need to withdraw this because something happened within my family and I'm going to relist it in 6 months. Are you going to push it? I mean, that's up to you. You can, but some agents are going to be like, nah, we're good. I'll pay the $25 and let's talk again soon, right?
so is there a limitation as far like, okay, say they canceled with me, they want to list with you for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, and I see within a week or two that they've listed with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on if you did, if they've relisted with me, if you did a mutual termination, then you're not covered. If you did a unilateral, if they unilaterally terminated, it would get sticky. Because it does say in there that it doesn't cover you if it's been relisted. But that says if it had expired, not if it was unilaterally terminated. So I think you would still be covered in that instance, unless you do a mutual. If you do a mutual, you have nothing.
So we say you say, something happened and I'll relist in 6 months and you say, okay, do y'all do a contract for that?
I would. I'd be like, all right, we'll just do another listing agreement, right? With a commencement or with a marketing date of 6 months from now. Then I know you're not going to go relist it with another agent. And in return, then they're not getting charged all of the fees that you've already incurred up front. So there's different things that you can do. There's, really no right or wrong, but you do have the right, if they terminate it early, to get the expenses that you've put into it.
So best practice, if you're doing the listing agreement, do you automatically let them know that should they decide for whatever reason they don't want to list after it's listed? And
Oh, yeah.
fees?
Yeah. My sellers know going into it, like, listen, I put a lot of time, a lot of marketing dollars behind this. I pay for photography. I usually pay for an appraisal. Like, I put money into it. And so this is my term, and this is the condition that I will, the only way that I'm going to put all of this into it is if you agree to this length of time. And if you cut that short, you have to reimburse me for everything. Like, I can't be out. And they're all like, yeah, like, of course. So I've never had an issue, but yes, it is clearly outlined at our, when I'm sitting down with them, that they know exactly what they're getting into. And they know that because I'm so upfront about everything, there is no hidden secret, anything that you're going to get. I'm completely transparent, and we either work together or we don't, but up front everything that this says and everything that you would be charged if this happens or whatever. Brochures, we're not going to go through those because we're already over our time. Exhibits, special steps. Page 11, by signing this agreement, the seller acknowledges that the seller has read all provisions and disclosures made herein. 2, that the seller understands all such provisions and disclosures and has entered into this agreement voluntarily. And 3, seller is not subject to a current seller brokerage engagement agreement with any other broker. If a licensee is signing this agreement on behalf of broker, licensee warrants that licensee has full authority to sign this agreement and bind broker hereto. Then, of course, you're going to have all of the signatures. Make sure that you have their phone number, their address, their email address. That information does not need to go on your purchase and sale agreement, but it does need to go on this. If you guys were to get into a car accident, who does this contract belong to? To the broker. If you get into a car accident, who is responsible for making sure that the public, these clients of the broker, continue to get the services that they need? The broker. If I have this and I have no phone number, I have no email because you have it in your phone and not on the contract, am I going to be able to contact them? No. Make sure that this is all filled out completely and then turned into your broker. I don't know what their policies are. Maximum one policy is within 3 days, not 3 business days, 3 days. Your broker should have a copy of this, and that's why. Because if something happens to you, which God forbid it doesn't, but if it does, because life happens to us all, somebody's got to be able to pick up this and continue on so that your clients aren't hurt. Because if they get harmed because we dropped the ball because we didn't know that they existed, we're going to end up running into lawsuits and things like that because they've been hurt. Now they've lost out on this house and contingency periods and things like that. So make sure that your broker knows of all of your contracts.
What about the flip side of that? What if the seller is in accident? I mean, their contract is binding, right? So what happens with that one?
It is, well, you're probably going to need to talk to the attorney. It depends. Is it under contract? If it's not under contract, how bad is the accident? Do you need to postpone and do an amendment and relist it in another month? Do you want to just let him out of it because he's going to be in the hospital for 3 months and then in rehab and whatever? You could. Kind of depends on the circumstances. But what does GREC exist? What is their existence? Why are they there? They are there to protect the public. So I promise you, everything that GREC does is to protect them, which is good. That's good for everybody. But in the process, we need to make sure that you are protecting them by making sure that if something were to happen to you, that somebody else can make sure that your clients aren't harmed and that their contingency deadlines and things like that are still met. So does all of that information need to be on your purchase and sale agreement? No. They just need their name and their signature and their date. On a purchase and sale? Nope. Because you're the one who accepts notice for them. So they have the other side has no reason or need to know their email address, their phone number, their whatever. Because what happens when you go to closing? Yep, not your client anymore. So can I now take this purchase and sale agreement and call your seller who just moved into a different big, beautiful home? They sold their home to my buyers. Can I contact that seller? Yep, sure can. Guess what I can do? It was so fantastic meeting you. I'm going to add you into my database. At the beginning of the year, when you go to closing and you've got you have your closing disclosure, guess what they need that disclosure for? Their taxes, their final HUD. They need that for their taxes. Guess what I'm doing? I've got their address. I'm going to fold it right on up, put it in an envelope, and I'm going to mail it to them with a kind little note that says, it's great doing business with you. I know in the midst of moving, all of this stuff gets very easily lost. Here's the copy for your taxes. Let me know if you need anything. Do I want other people doing that to my clients? No, I do not. So I say that, don't freely give out all of your clients' information, but you also should be taking care of your clients so that they're not looking at other agents who are like, oh, I can send you an email. And they're like, no, I'm good. My agent, she's got me. Right?
So purchase agreement only needs signature and date.
Yep. Not for you guys. You have to have all of your information in there. But for the buyer and seller, they do not need their address and their phone number and their email and all that good stuff. That's all I've got. How many of you guys learned something today? Good. Good, good.
Your last name, one more time.
Foster.